Hi everybody, Adam here. So today I want to talk about the topic of can you teach an old dog new tricks? Which is to say, is it possible as you get older to continue learning new skills, to continue developing new skills as effectively as you could essentially when you were younger? And so I think that we have this conception that essentially kids are way better at learning things, that kids are way better at learning languages, that kids are way better at picking up skills, and that simply as we get older, our brains get a little bit less adaptable, agile, I don't know, whatever you want to say, and as a result, we simply get a little bit worse at learning new skills, at exercising, and so on. And while I'm no certainly expert or researcher on the topic of mental decline over time, I really don't think that this is the case. I did a bit of cursory research, I skimmed through some studies, and basically a lot of the things that I was seeing were suggesting that people are able to maintain most of their cognitive ability for most of their lives, generally, even into their 60s or so, and continue to develop new skills, continue to learn new things, and so on. Even then, of course, a big problem is just that as you get old enough, you start to deal with things like Alzheimer's and dementia, which are a huge impact in terms of the cognitive ability of the average population of that cohort. Of course, this doesn't mean that you're going to be the exact same. Your cognitive ability does decline a little bit over time as you age, and of course, I would expect that certain kinds of mental abilities would decline faster or slower than others. This also goes along a lot with what I already know about the way that fitness works and the way that basically anybody can get jacked at basically any age. There have been plenty of studies on this topic that have validated the fact that basically anybody can adapt to exercise at basically any age. A while back, Greg Nuckols did an excellent piece about the topic of aging and its impact on performance in powerlifting. And what he found was that as you get older, certainly your performance does decline a little bit, but it's not nearly as much as most people would think in masters powerlifters. Of course, this primarily applies to strength and not necessarily to other variables. So kind of one thing that is well known is that one variable that decays very quickly as you age is explosiveness, which is to say speed. Speed decays very quickly and you peak very early on in your life, and then as you get older, it just basically goes down. When it comes to a lot of other variables, like for example, endurance, strength, building muscle mass, all of those things are things that you can continue to do even into a very old age. So if we have this general impression that basically our bodies and our minds decay very quickly, but in fact they decay a lot more slowly than we expect as we age, what does that really mean in terms of our efforts for getting better at fitness, learning a new skill, learning a new language, learning a new instrument, and so on? Why is it that at the end of the day, we have this impression that kids learn things so quickly relative to adults? Well, I would say that the first major point is simply that children have a really ideal situation in terms of being able to learn. Children don't have jobs, they don't have pre-existing responsibilities, they don't have things that clutter up their day as much and require that they spend a lot of time on all these just various things that clog up the days of most adults. Additionally, kids are less afraid of being wrong. Kids are just like, yes, many kids are very afraid of being wrong, but when you're a very, very young child, you make mistakes constantly. You're constantly messing up language, you're constantly messing up X, Y, and Z, and you don't have the same sense of shame that comes with being an adult and being afraid of looking bad. Because as an adult, you expect, okay, I'm an adult, I should look good, I should look competent, I shouldn't do things that look embarrassing, and as a result, you're less willing to simply try new things that you're not good at and be comfortable with making mistakes. With all of this, for example, it still takes a child about 3 years to learn their first language. And by the time a child is 10, they've had 10 years learning the language. That time span is kind of important. We'll come back to that in a little bit. And additionally, they are fully immersed in that language in a way that as an adult, you don't really necessarily get to immerse yourself in a foreign language unless you're actually living in a foreign country where you're exposed to that language every single day. Instead, a child, by definition, is forced to interact with that language constantly. And if they want to learn to be able to communicate, then they have to learn that language. They have to start piecing together the basics of how that language works in order to get their needs fulfilled. That's something where, as an adult, very often what we do instead is we default to trying to use our previous language so much because that's simply what's comfortable and natural and normal for us, and that's what we've been doing the most. In contrast, of course, adults just have a ton of pre-existing responsibilities. We have things like jobs, we have things like families, we have less free time to be able to focus on learning a new skill, learning a new language, developing a new exercise habit, and so on. All of these habits, routines, and patterns take away from potential learning time that we could be spending towards learning something new. As an adult, of course, it feels a lot sillier to start over with something. It feels a lot more embarrassing to be bad at something because we're so used to an entire lifetime of being good at something that we don't like to seek out things that could potentially get us mocked or things that could potentially involve us taking unnecessary risks in terms of just our impression on the community, on the people around us. You always default to what has worked for you in the past. It's also a lot harder to immerse yourself in anything. When you're an adult, you have your time because it is a lot more split up over the various responsibilities that you have. You have a lot less dedicated time to really focus on something, whereas kids may just have entire days where they don't have any responsibilities and can just do whatever they want. When you're an adult and you're faced with the prospect of spending like that child previously who takes 3 to 10 years to learn a language effectively, do you have 3 to 10 years to dedicate to something? Not necessarily. You can't really afford to make the same kinds of commitments that you could when you were younger. However, there's another important topic to discuss, which is the topic of meta-learning. Meta-learning is just, of course, the process of learning how to learn. And that is one advantage that adults have over children, is simply that they've had a lot more experience and a lot more practice learning things. And so as a result, if they learn from those lessons, they can then learn things much quicker because they have a lot more experience. I remember, for example, that when I was in high school, I used to be tasked with writing like a 1 or 2 page paper, and it would be like, it would be like pulling teeth. It sucked because it was just like, I've never done this before. I don't like doing this. I don't like setting out an argument and doing research and blah, blah, blah. And as a result, I just wasn't any good at writing papers. But then, of course, I went to university, I got a literature degree, and that involved writing a lot of papers. And so it got to the point where they would say, hey, you need to write this 10 or 15 page paper, and I would just crank it out in a couple of days like it was no big deal. In fact, by the time that I got to the end of university and I was doing my thesis project, I had to write essentially a 50-page well-researched paper, and I wrote the entire thing in like a week because I had done basically a lot of the research in advance. I knew what I wanted to write about, and I was able to cite a lot of sources, and I was able to write that paper relatively quickly. I just focused on it and got it done. And then I spent basically the rest of that semester that I was supposed to be focusing on that paper, just kind of going back and forth with my thesis advisor, okay, making a few edits here, okay, changing a section there, and that was it. It was basically done from week 1, and then I was basically just coasting for the rest of the semester. And that was only possible because I had spent years at that point learning how to write papers and getting good at writing papers. Over time, you get better at learning simply because you know what's worked for you in the past, and you develop more efficient patterns for learning things, for practicing things, for reviewing things, and making sure that you know what to focus on when reading or when writing or whatever the case is with whatever academic skill that you're learning, that you just get better at it over time because you've had more practice, you've had more time to learn how to do it. A good example is the concept of languages. When I was first learning a language in school, I was no good at it. I was learning French, I wasn't very interested, I was studying in a particularly inefficient way, and as a result, it took me, maybe like 10 years to get to anywhere near a decent level of proficiency. And I've now been at the point where I've effectively been learning French for about 20 years out of my life. And I'm still, only at a decent proficiency as a result of just long periods of not doing anything, long periods of not knowing what I was doing, long periods of not being focused, and so on. In contrast, recently, my wife and I moved to Denmark about 5 years ago at this point, and as a result of that, I was like, okay, I want to learn Danish, and I knew the second time around what not to do. I knew how to learn from those mistakes. And so what I did was I really sat down, I really focused on learning in the right way, and as a result, I was able to learn the language relatively quickly. I was able to learn the language pretty well over a period of just about a year, and since then, I have continued to practice, I have continued to learn, And I've gotten to a point where now, 5 years later, I am significantly good at the language, certainly not perfect, but I'm very easily able to communicate it. I'm very easily able to make myself understood. And this is something where, again, it might take a child 3 to 10 years to effectively learn their first language to a decent proficiency. And that's just because they're a kid. They are immersed in the language, they're fully exposed to it, they have constant practice with it, but they're a kid. They don't have, the best sense of the best way to learn a language and so on. And so, they struggle and they make mistakes, and that's a normal part of, being a child. This time around, since I had learned significantly from my mistakes when it came to learning French, I just knew how to hit the ground running, and I just went for it, and I was able to learn, I would say, a lot faster than you would typically expect someone to learn a language. There's also one last topic that I want to talk about, and that's the topic of dedication. There is a really, really important emphasis on dedication that I don't think is covered enough in a lot of the just general literature on improving your finances, getting in shape, learning a new language, learning a new skill, learning an instrument, whatever the case is. Dedication is something that I think I, in particular, didn't have as a kid. When I was younger, basically all I wanted to do was play video games and hang out with my friends. I didn't have any dedication to learning a skill because it simply, wasn't a thing that was important to me. I just didn't find anything that I really enjoyed doing or that I really wanted to learn. And as a result, I was constantly just bouncing around between various different subjects and various different topics and things like that. And okay, I think guitar is cool, so I'm going to practice guitar for a couple months and then I'm going to get bored and move on to the next thing. It's something where when you're an adult, you can understand a lot more the value of dedication and with sticking with something for a very long time and sticking through the rough parts and getting to the parts where all that good effort really starts to add up, as opposed to just being frustrated in the moment when things are not working out. There's not really any point to learning a new skill if you're not going to stick around and practice it for at least a few years. You learn as an adult to think on longer timelines. You learn to think on timelines of 5 years, 10 years, and so on. And as a result, you're able to really actually dedicate yourself and actually stick through, again, those sticking points, those difficulties that would normally kind of just derail you when you don't have that kind of dedication. Nowadays, I'm simply a lot more organized as an adult. I'm simply a lot better able to determine, okay, what do I actually want? What do I actually want to focus on? What are my goals? And I can actually pick things and work towards them over a long period of time in an intelligent way, as opposed to, again, when I was a kid and I just didn't have that level of self-perception. I just kind of did things that I wanted to do, and that was it. So that's a really important factor that I think often gets overlooked, which is simply that at the end of the day, you really have to enjoy and want to do the things that you are doing, that you want to get better at. You really do need to focus on learning to love things and learning to find ways that you enjoy things and that make that practice and that mastery process completely worthwhile. So that has been it for this week's video. As always, if you liked the video, comment below, let me know what you want to see in future videos. Smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, help level up the channel, and I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one.